Okay, so we are recording now, and welcome everybody to today's The Nomadic Network talk. We're just going to wait another minute or two for any last minute stragglers, but feel free to type into the chat where you're calling in from in the world, how many TNN events you've been to. Is this your first event? Is this your 50th event? Let us know. And since we're talking about publishing, indie publishing today, let us know where you are on your writing journey. Are you sort of just in the idea stage? Have you started on a manuscript? Have you finished a manuscript? Let us know where you're at. Okay, great. So we've got Toronto, awesome, my hometown. 20 events, great. Another Toronto, all right. Shout out to the 6. Vancouver, Washington, my second favorite Vancouver in the world. Okay, so we've got Andalusia, Spain, great. So we've got a good mix of people. So welcome everybody. And we've got people just starting, people on the final draft, completed a novel, congrats. That is a mountain you've summited, great. So everybody, welcome again. My name is Chris. I'm one of our virtual hosts for the Nomadic Network. I work for Nomadic Matt. Today, we're going to be talking about all things indie publishing, but before we jump into that, I just have a couple quick things I want to go over with everyone. So I'm going to share my screen here so that we can talk about the Nomadic Network. So for those of you who don't know, the Nomadic Network, TNN, is a community of travelers, travel enthusiasts from all around the world, as you can see from the chat. We host in-person events when it's safe and virtual events all the time. And for these virtual events, there are just a couple of rules I would like to go over. You can definitely keep your camera on so we can see those smiling faces, but just keep yourself muted so that we don't interrupt the presentation. There's a chat function, so feel free to chime in, share your thoughts. And then if you have any questions, just type the word question into the chat, and then I'll get to that at the end, and Luke can answer any and all of your questions. If you would like a recording of this event or any of our other events, you can get those at Nomadic Matt Plus. The link is there in the chat, nomadicmatt.com/NM+. That's where we save all of our recordings. And we've got a ton of other awesome travel perks. So you can check that out afterwards or follow us on Instagram. But that's all from me. So joining us today, as I'm sure you all know, is Lou Richardson, best-selling independent author of almost a dozen books now over a couple different series. I just finished his latest book a couple of days ago. It was great. Hopefully you guys have checked him out already, but if you haven't, I'll put his social links in the chat in a bit. But Luke, if you want to take it over, it's all yours.
Yeah, hi. Thank you all for coming. This is brilliant. Right, I'm going to try and figure this out. This is always a messy bit, isn't it? The screen sharing part of the process. There we go. There we go. Share. Can everyone see the picture of me with the pink background?
Yep, you're good.
I'm good. Excellent. Excellent. So yeah, hi, I'm Luke. I'm a writer of thriller novels and a massive travel addict, which my writing sort of exists in the confluence of those two things. I love to write about the things that I see and that I do whilst I'm traveling. So today I'm going to talk to you sort of about that journey and how I did that. But I know what you're thinking when I show you this first screen. You know, this guy talks about travel. This guy talks about all the great things he's seen in great places and stuff like that. What a vain person to choose having a picture of himself on the first screen there. Yeah, and you know what? I'm owning that. I'll take that, and it will become a little bit relevant in a minute. Don't you worry. So over the course, I have to say, I was a teacher in a high school for many years, and I've got this habit still that they teach you at teacher school, which is you start with what we're going to learn, then we learn the thing, then at the end I'll tell you what we've just learned. So if you see me do that, sorry in advance if you feel like you're back at high school or secondary school, as we call it in the UK. So today we're going to talk about, I've finished writing. What now? That's the question you might be asking. So for the couple of people that said we're in that position, that have written books already, this part could be for you. Then I'm going to talk about what independent publishing actually is and should you do it. This isn't me selling the concept to you. It's not for everyone. There's certain people who don't like the idea for very good reasons, and that's absolutely fine. I'm just going to give you sort of an impression of what that involves. Then we're going to talk about building a writing business, which is the thing that I'm sort of working on at the moment, the part of it that I'm sort of developing right now. And I suppose that will never be finished. I suppose that will always be a sort of work in progress. And then at the end, we'll have loads of time for questions. So as Chris says, if you have a question, try and remember it if you want, but probably easier is put it in the chat now, just preceded by the word question, and then we'll go through them all at the end of the presentation. It may be the best way to do it. So first of all, who am I? As I said, I'm an ex-English teacher. That's not me. I resigned from the school in 2020, just before the lockdown. I handed in my notice the day before the world stopped, which was an interesting one. I was taking that as a great sign. Yes, you're doing the right thing, but I mean, maybe not. I also DJ in nightclubs. That is me, and I'm back doing that now, which has been quite good fun. But it's really got in the way of my writing habit, I have to say, getting up late. So it was getting up late because I've been up late the night before. I'm a writer. That's my first novel. We'll talk more about that in a minute. I'm a total monument poser. I think there's nothing wrong in taking pictures of yourself in front of monuments. Please do it. Don't be one of these people who went to the Great Wall of China and didn't take a photo because you were like, oh, I didn't want to do that. You don't want to be one of those people with a selfie stick on top of like the Great Wall. No, fine, do that, own that. And here are the books that I've written. My first series and the series that I write on my own are all of these ones, plus Riga, which is the new one. It's not in that photo. Here it is. And they follow the pursuits of two characters, Leo and Allissa, who are missing persons investigators. They are the sort of people who, now you will have seen over the course of time these headlines that we get in our newspapers that say, talk about tourists going missing whilst hiking in the Himalayas or on a desert island or whatever that might be. My guys are the people that go out and find those people, because quite often you find that the story stays in the press, doesn't it, for a week or so, and then it disappears and you never hear anything of that person again until some bad news or some good news comes weeks later. But my people are the people behind that. And they're all inspired by places I've been. That's why I use the titles as the place, as the name of the place, because sort of for me, the setting is a character in itself. And I don't decide to write about a place in advance. It's sort of, I go and see it and experience it. And then it sort of speaks to me and says, yeah, there's a story here, write about it. These are 3 books I've written with another guy called Steve Moore. They're sort of co-authored. We've written them together. One of them, Dubai, the Set Them Free is written in a place. Set Them Free is written in a place I've been. The other 2, Steve championed their places he's been, and I've yet to visit San Francisco and Sydney. And there's my latest book. I did show you it. We don't need to see it there. But first of all, and most importantly, I suppose, is this one, Kathmandu, because there's finishing that first book is such a big experience, as anyone who's done that or anyone who's working on that will testify. It's a really big challenge to get that way. I can't even think of a metaphor to describe it, but it is so difficult and so complicated. And in December 2017, I set about writing this novel. I remember I was staying in Madrid at the time, and I went to this cool little cafe, and I sat there with my laptop. And I sat there for hours, opened a new Word document and just sort of went for it, hammering away, writing what was probably rubbish at the time, And I'd written a few little stories before, short stories and this sort of thing, and enjoyed the process and was up for the challenge and just sort of went into it. I just had to do it, Anyway, after the long process of early mornings and false starts and gallons of coffee, finally, about a year later, I actually got to write the end on that book. And I've got one of the first drafts, printed like this. And I just remember leaning back in my chair and thinking, what now? What do I have to do now? What's the next process? And, then sort of went into the rabbit hole of discovery, which I will sort of lead you through now. It really was a rabbit hole that I don't feel like I'm fully out of yet. I'm still working my way through it. Okay, so first of all, sort of what is independent publishing? Let me give you this in a nutshell. Okay, some people call it self-publishing, some people call it independent publishing. It's the same thing essentially. I prefer the word independent publishing rather than self-publishing. I think it sounds cooler, for one. You know, we talk about indie musicians, don't we? And we think, oh, they're cool. You talk about self-published authors and you've got this idea of someone who tried to get traditionally published, but their book was rubbish and they couldn't do it. You know, there's a different concept there. So actually, I go for the word independent publishing. And the other reason I don't use the word self-publishing is because you're not really doing it on your own. There's loads of other people's help you have to get along the way, whether that's people like myself having conversations like this, whether that's editors and these sorts of things, which we'll talk about in detail in a minute. But when you are an independent publisher, you are both the writer and the publisher of your books. You play two roles, and they are clearly different roles. First of all, I'm writing the book at my computer. I'm caring about it. I'm bleeding, as Hemingway would say, onto the typewriter. And then when I've finished it, you have to step back and you pick it up and you look at it as a product, you know, and you have to say, right, who's going to buy this? And that's difficult. That's two very separate hats. And you do see a lot of people early in their independent publishing sort of journey who haven't yet made that separation, and they're still caring too much. You know, the book is still too personal to them. And that's really, it is personal to you, of course it is, but you do have to make that separation. That's very important. Otherwise, it can be very, very difficult. It's very difficult to switch that role, you know. Okay. When you independently publish, you retain ownership of your books. Now, I have to say now that I have never traditionally published. I've never even tried it. Okay, I didn't even want to. You know, I did this research and I made that decision from square one. I'm not suggesting it's a bad thing, but this is one of the things that I think is a big plus for the independent publishing sort of route. You retain ownership of your book. You are the owner of that. You have the intellectual property of that book. You own that copyright in the UK and in the US, and I think Europe and the rest of the North American countries, and these sorts of things are the same. You own the copyright of that book for your life plus 70 years after your life. And you never quite know what's going to happen with that. You know what I mean? You never know who's going to pick that up or what that book might become, even after you're gone, you know, and that's in your estate. You know, you never quite know. So that was really important to me. And I like that idea that I owned that and I could decide how that went. Okay. That means you can do what you like with it. You can translate it into different languages. You can give it away free to raise awareness for a cause. You know, there are people who write not necessarily just for making money. They might write about a particular political issue or the particular plight of a underrepresented community. You can give that away free just to raise awareness. If you had a publisher, they're going to say, you can't give that away free. That's ours. You know, they're not going to let you do that. They're going to make sure that you charge for that. You can have someone else sell it for you. You can license it to other people. You know, you can turn it into an audio book or an audio drama or whatever it is you want to do. There's lots of different things. It also means you can sell that product direct or using stores. Now, most people, myself included, use stores. And I think pretty much 99% of independent authors use stores mostly. Things like Amazon, iBooks, Kobo, all of these sorts of things, even down to physical bookstores, you know, we might be talking. But if you're a very big name independent publisher, you could sell that book direct. You know, you have a big mailing list, you have a big Twitter following or a big community. There's no reason to say you can't print a few thousand of those books and have them mailed out to everyone or sell them as ebooks or whatever and do a transaction through PayPal or whatever else you might want to do. There's no reason you can't do that. You could even buy a box of them and go roaming door to door in your city, you know, knocking on people's doors and saying, do you want to buy my book? I wouldn't recommend that as a strategy, but it's certainly out there as a possible one should you find that useful. The problem, though, this is the big one. This is the difficulty of independent publishing. You have to drive that demand. No one is out there waiting for your book. No one is out there thinking, oh, I wish there was a book cool set in Kathmandu about two people who hunt for missing people. Even if they do want that book, they don't know that I'm the person that wrote it, and they don't know where to find it. So you need to drive that demand. You need to tell people about that, or pay someone to do it for you, work with someone to do it for you, however that might be. Okay, so who is independent publishing for, and why did I consider this? And this is for you to make that decision yourself and have a think about whether it's something that is worth it for you based on who you are and what you enjoy doing and how you enjoy spending your time and what your circumstances are. Number one, I sort of alluded to this already, but control. As the writer and the publisher, I'm in total control of the whole process. And I love the idea of this. Maybe I'm a little bit of a control freak, but I really liked it. I can decide when I'm happy with this book. I get to say when it's finished, whatever that might be. Sometimes that's even a bad thing. It's finished, I've had enough of it, and it's not. You probably should have another edit of that, or have another look at it, or whatever it might be. I can decide the best way to release a book, doing research and talking to friends and doing online courses and whatever else I might like to do. And I can try anything that I like the sound of. Of course, this does have negatives in that I don't always know best. If you work with a publisher, they're going to have a lot more experience than you do. But now, having done this a couple of years, I know who to ask. I take advice from other people. I know which voices in the sort of community align with mine. I'm not going to say there are voices that are bad, but I know there are ones that don't suit the way that I like to do things. So I know the people that I sort of listen to. The second one is speed. Now, traditional publishing moves very, very slowly. And I was talking with Chris about this before we came on the line, and it can add to this afterwards, but it can take months or even years for each step of that traditionally published process. And then when you get that publishing deal, you've got to fit to that publisher's release schedule. They might say, well, our next opening is 9 months away or a year away or whatever, and you fit with that because it's their book. You've sold it to them. It's what they want to do. I've heard that sort of 2 years, is quite a quick turnaround in the traditional role. I didn't want to do that. I was way too impatient for that. I wanted to get it out and see what became of it and see what happened. I'm not saying I'll never go down that route, but for the first series, I just wanted to do that and see how it went. Now, indie publishing is as quick as you want to make it. Technically, you could finish a book one afternoon and have it worldwide the following day. Technically, I wouldn't recommend that. Proper editing and proofreading are very, very important, but it is possible. It can be on your readers' Kindles within a couple of hours or even less if you've got those readers ready to go. I love learning about new things. I really enjoy that. And I enjoyed that particularly with this, as I've talked about it like a rabbit hole, and it really is. And it can be overwhelming at times. And I know there's a couple of people on this call who've published books already. I think they'll testify for the fact that it can be very overwhelming. You don't know who to listen to. You don't know sort of where to go with things. But if you enjoy upskilling, if you enjoy learning and you enjoy getting involved in those things, I definitely recommend that. I've been doing this. I published Kathmandu 2019, spring of 2019, and I feel like I'm starting to get to grips with it. But then something comes along and changes, and it's something that takes a long time, But I felt like I was up for the challenge. I wanted to do it. Perhaps if you don't have the time or the inclination to immerse yourself in this, then it may not be the route that you choose to take. And that is absolutely cool. That's absolutely fine, of course. Finally, connection I want to talk about, because, and this came as a bit of a surprise to me, actually. I didn't think about this before I'd published it. But one of the things that I loved about publishing my books in this way is the connection with the readers. Now, I'm sure you get this too in the traditional sense, but I think it's accentuated in the independent sense because I am their first port of call. My personal email address is in the back of that book. They email me and it pops up on my phone, on my screen, and I can have a conversation with that person who's just finished my book straight away. And I really enjoy that, when someone's in that sort of that heady finished the book mood of happiness and they've just enjoyed your characters and you can talk to them about that. I absolutely love those conversations. I really, really like that. And to a degree, I think that connection goes sort of behind the scenes as well. I share things about my personal life, with readers, including my travels and all of that, because they're a big part of the story. So for me, that connection is very important. I think that works in the sort of, I think that works more for the sort of independent, in the independent sort of way. Right. So you're not doing this all yourself. And I talked about this earlier. I alluded to this earlier, because there are loads of things that go into producing and marketing the books. Here's just a few of them. Editing, of course. That book needs to be as good as one that you would get in a professional, from a professional publishing house, because people notice those things. They do, and it needs to be well edited. Cover design, unless you are a professional designer, you can spot homemade covers a mile off. Go onto Amazon, type something in, and you'll find loads of really, really poor covers that look like they've been done by someone who doesn't know what they're doing. And that's the beauty of the system, and that's the downfall of the system. You can put something up there very quickly, but if you haven't got that person to do it professionally, unless you've got years of design experience, I would certainly sort that out. Sorting out your website, proofreading, again, marketing, I suppose that comes under that. Formatting, that's turning the book from sort of your Word document into how it looks inside, how it looks with all the chapter headings and the drop caps and all of those sorts of things. That's a skill in itself. Book metadata, so that's the blurb, the book description, the categories it goes in, the categories it goes in, all of the keywords that you might use to search to find that book. That's a thing in itself. Social media, Instagram, all of those sorts of things can come under there. Accounts is one that a lot of people don't think of if you haven't run a business before. You are running a business here. You have costs, you have profit, you have losses, all of these sorts of things. That's something important to upskill and learn about. And networking, that you do that anyway, whatever publishing side you use, but I think it's particularly important in the independent side because of how much you need to learn. But there are loads of groups and places that authors hang out. So my point here is that to do a decent job, you do need to hand things over to other people. You have to sort of build a small team around you to help you with the process, and that is important. So you're not doing it on yourself, hence why I prefer the term sort of indie rather than self. I think self can be a bit misleading. So we're on to sort of building an author business, building a writer business. And this is the bit that I feel I'm at now, really. This is the bit I'm working on at the moment. And it's turning these books from something that makes a modest income, something that's like a side job, to something that gives me a decent amount of money each month to fund my travels. That's the dream. That's where I'm really looking to go. And as importantly for me, to reach loads of people, to tell them about these really cool and exciting places that I go. So talking about doing that and how to do that is sort of building strategies and building routines and building all of the things that you might do in a normal job in order to make that more simple. So you're not making a new decision each time you release a book. You have a plan. You know what you're doing. You know what works. You know what doesn't. You're experimenting and weighing things up. Again, and this is sort of something I've learned from talking to very successful authors and listening to very successful authors on podcasts. And the more I see it, the more I sort of think this is true. The online business world, and as an author, that's essentially what you are, is running and doing this independent publishing thing. What you are essentially is running an online business, and that's always changing. That's always becoming different as new social medias come out, as people move into different things and like different things, and I think that's particularly true in books, because the way people read is always changing. Audio books and, smart speakers and all this technology that's coming along. And it's an ongoing journey of discovery, trying new things and seeing what works. That's true whether you're a blogger or a podcaster or whatever you might be able to do. But what I find really inspiring is you talk to these authors that have been doing this for 10 plus years, and they talk about trying new things. They talk about how they've experimented with something in exactly the same way I might, 2.5, 3 years into my journey of publishing, it's always day one. There's always stuff to learn. And I think it's one of those things that you're never finished with, but you get further down that sort of process and keep sort of working on it. And that becomes, that becomes the lifestyle, that becomes the business. And finally, to sort of wrap up and to bring us back to the start, I want to talk again about this connection, because this for me is always going to be the key with this business. If your books are great, they connect with people on some level. They make people feel or experience something. And I think there is always going to be a place for that. Maybe I'm an optimist, maybe people always say I'm a very positive person, but I think if your books are genuinely heartfelt and genuinely good and genuinely pass on a positive experience to people, there will be a place for them. It's just a case of finding out where that place was. And ultimately, this brings us back to being you and being personal and being open and being kind and all of those things that I think as travelers come a little bit, I wouldn't say come naturally to us, but we learn on the journey, don't we? We learn those things every time we step out of our front doors and see things and experience other people and the way that they live. You're selling something that takes people on an experience, that takes them on a journey, and for me, sort of owning that process has been a very powerful thing. This is the dedication in the back of my latest book, Riga, and I wanted to sort of share it because I think it sort of makes the point that I'm talking about now, with the idea of connection, and the idea of the fact that my favorite thing about this independent publishing is that connection, is the fact there is no one between me and my readers. There's a very close connection between us both, and that for me is the thing that I really like about this method of publishing. And I've said in the back of the book, books are difficult to write. Anyone that tells you that differently is lying. And I can see several people nodding on the on the Zoom call now. Not a month goes by where I don't think it's too hard or it's not worth it. Every time this happens, as though by magic, I get an email from a reader like you. Some are simple messages of encouragement, others are heartfelt. Each one shows me that I'm not doing this alone. If you've ever reached out to me, this book is dedicated to you. I appreciate the messages more than you'll ever know. They kept me going when all seemed lost. And believe me, that happens more than you might think when you're halfway through a manuscript and it's just not working, and given me purpose when I didn't see it myself. And that sort of takes us back to the image I was sharing at the start, because the idea I'm trying to sort of say here is it is about me. Ultimately, not self-publishing, not the point of the presentation, but the idea of being the owner of these books and being behind these books is that I am selling part of my life. I'm selling part of who I am, and I'm selling my experiences to the people who choose to buy them. And for me, that's a really, really important thing. And that's a part of it that I've absolutely loved. And if that's something that it sounds like you love, if you're the sort of person, if you're like me and you enjoy that sort of connection, I think it would be something that you'd enjoy too. Thank you so much for joining me for this. I've really enjoyed talking. I will look forward to answering your questions in a moment. If you're interested in reading some of my books and you haven't already, you can grab a copy of the prequel to the series, Kotao, on that link there, lukerichardsonauthor.com/Kotao. You will be added to my mailing list for doing that. That's how I make a lot of the connections with people. You can unsubscribe at any time should you want to, with no hard feelings. You don't have to stick around, although it'd be nice if you did. Also, though, if you're writing a novel and just want to get in touch, I'm more than happy to jump on Zoom personally with you and give you some advice or whatever might be helpful to you. My email address is there. My Instagram is there as well. And I also host a podcast, the Travel Now podcast, where I talk about my travels and less so my writing. That's more about travel than writing. But if you're looking for something new to listen to inspire your travel and get you thinking about your next trip, check that out as well. Thank you.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. Let's leave that up on the screen just for an extra second so people can copy that down. All the links will be emailed out to everyone afterwards.
Sorry. There we go. Oh, no. Right. Come right back to the start.
I'll toss your social in there. You'll get an email, everyone, afterwards. I think maybe tomorrow or next week with all the links and everything. So if you don't, jot them down. I'm just going to jump through the chat here. We've got a bunch of awesome questions. So I'm just going to scroll back up to the top. So Libby's wondering about marketing. What's worth investing in? Are you doing ads on Amazon or Instagram? Where should people sort of start when it comes to marketing?
It's a good question. And like most good questions, the answer is it depends. Libby, if you want to unmute yourself, and it'd be nice to know sort of about your circumstances and your where you're sort of what position you're in, because that would make answering that question a lot easier.
So I am a editor and writing coach, and I just started making content for my clients. And I put out one workbook already, and I posted it on Amazon, and I'm getting ready to launch my second one. And I'm just struggling to navigate like where to invest my dollars. Like does it, do me better to put it on Instagram or to try and hack the algorithm on Amazon? And I just feel like with Amazon, I didn't get a good return, and I've had a little bit more success on Instagram. But I was just wondering like what seems to work for you, if you actually invest money into your books for marketing, or if you just do it all like just posting on your Instagram instead of trying to actually put money into, ads.
I do pay for ads. Yeah. But the only way that has been profitable for me is, and I'm still at the start of that journey. It's something that you learn over years. I haven't come from a marketing background, so it's been a real steep learning curve. The only way I've made that possible is by having several books in the series. So people go on and read sort of through those books. That said, I've heard in the sort of non-fiction space that you're writing in, because you can charge a little bit more, because the keywords are a little bit less sort of competitive, because it's a product that sort of delivers a result. You're actually helping someone do something. You can charge a little bit more and perhaps make the keywords are a little bit easier to search. So perhaps the ads would work for you in that extent. The answer is I've not really got an experience in publishing what you specifically have written. I would say ads could work, but I wouldn't want you to go forward and chuck a load of money in and see.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I can't really. I can't really give you a definitive answer.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Of course, yeah, absolutely.
Do you use like other writers to advertise for you? Like you say, I'll post about your book on social media if you post on mine? Yes,
I have done that. And with mailing lists and things, I've got a community of writers that I work with to help with that. Now, I don't know with, maybe something like podcasts might be useful to you, to appear on writers' podcasts, to offer to do something like this on for a writers group, or to do, content marketing is quite good, I think, in the non-fiction place, because you've got a direct sort of sale, haven't you? You go on a podcast for writers and give them 10 great tips about getting the best out of your manuscript, and then at the end you talk about your book, and a few hundred people listen to that. That's a very sort of sequential way for them to go forwards and buy your book, or look at you, or contact you for the services that you offer.
I'm just going to jump in with something because Nomadic Matt, who I work for, has written a bunch of books in marketing. I will say one thing I've realized is, writing is the hardest part, but like 90% of this is marketing at the end of the day, because you're trying to get your stuff out there. And so what I've noticed from Matt when he does his book tours is things we've talked about here, ads, but do some testing first on Facebook, Instagram, see where your demographic is. Newsletters and social, as Luke has said, podcasts, definitely, but also blog posts. Matt will line up 4, 5, sometimes up to 10 blog posts, write them out in advance for other blogs, as a guest poster, as a way to sort of get his new book out and sort of get people talking about it. So, if you have a book launch coming up and there are blogs you think you might be able to guest post on that relate to what you're writing about, that's another great way to sort of get your name out there and while also networking. I'm going to scroll down the list here. Any writer's block tips? Eric, someone I've been chatting with actually before, he's built his world. He's got lots of possibilities, but there's too many possibilities now. So any tips for someone in that stage where they've got lots of ideas but aren't really sure, where to go?
Yes, I mean, the way I have dealt with writer's block in the past, and I mean, I'm sort of reluctant to use that term because I think that can be a bit sort of nebulous. I think there's a particular reason. Sometimes I just don't want to get started. I feel like I'm not ready to do this yet. Firstly, I would say planning out what you're going to write in advance is always a good way. Now, people always say, "Oh, I like to just go and write and discover what I'm making as I go on," which is absolutely fine if that's your way to do it. But if you're struggling to know where to go, I think maybe it is a good idea to have some kind of path written out, some kind of path that the characters can sort of go on. So then you can see the book on one side of A4. This is the thing. If you've got an unwieldy manuscript of 100,000 words, you can't see that development very easily. You've got to really dive into it to read it, to see where that development is. If you can see that on one page, you can go, oh yeah, that works. Even write out that plan 5, 6, 7 times. Put them out on the kitchen table and go, which one do I like? Which one gives me that feeling that makes me want to jump in and write that? The other thing I would say, and this is what I do when I'm in that sort of state and I just don't want to do it, is I just set my target really low. I'm like, right, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to write 200 words, and I sit there and I write 200 words, but then I'm in the flow of it and I write another 1,000. And then I like what I'm doing, so I write another 1,000 after that. But if I'd said I'm going to go and write 2,500 words or 3,000 words, I'd have gone, oh no, oh God, I don't feel like that. Oh, no way. But by just having that little bit, by just saying I'm going to go and do something, it makes it gets you started. Yeah,
great point. Next up, we've got Christina. Is there a certain audience size that maybe a new writer should have before they release? Should they be researching anything regarding demographics or audience beforehand?
Good question. I would say no. I would say with the first book, put it out and see, because unless you've written your first book to market, which I think is unlikely. I think if people do write to market, they'll do that later, further down the line, when they've sort of cut their teeth on something they're really passionate about. You don't know, unless you've done that, you don't know who your audience really is going to be, and even I find I struggle with that sometimes, thinking, who likes my book, because the people I talk to are quite a disparate group of various, people all over the world in all different situations. So I struggle to sort of go, in that sort of marketing thing, here is the avatar, here's the person that my books really, really sort of appeal to. So no, I wouldn't say that. I would say worry about the audience later. Put your book out there, get it in the hands of some people who are interested, who or people who you can share with another writer who's in a sort of similar genre, and take it from there.
Yeah, great point. If you like something, there's going to be thousands more people out there who do as well. We're not as, in that sense, we're not as unique as we think. There's always, if one person likes something on the internet, there's a community for everything, regardless of how weird or niche you get. So yeah, great advice. Next up, we have Kevin. How much of your sort of author time is spent writing and editing versus business stuff?
Good question. I haven't done a lot of writing and editing in the last few months. I've been sort of focusing on other projects, but I'd like to say more is spent writing and editing. And I think probably about 60% of it is in the creative sense. At the moment, because I'm, as I say, trying to sort of scale it up in a business sense, there's a lot of skills I've realized, having gone to this level, that I need to go back and relearn some things, that I need to go back and focus on things. So for me at the moment, that's what I'm doing. I've noticed some gaps in my knowledge, so I'm going back and sort of filling these things up, which is part of the journey when you run any sort of business, really. But when I'm in sort of normal production mode, it's probably about 60-40, I reckon.
Cool. And what about when it comes to pre-orders? Any sort of suggestion for how long they should be? Should they be months long? Should they just be a few days or a couple of weeks?
All authors will tell you different things. What I did last with Riga, that I'm going to do again with the next book, which will be called Istanbul and set in Istanbul, is I put the pre-order up months in advance. So I put it up in, I think, March, and it got released last week. And I'm going to do the same. I'm going to put the Istanbul one up in about 2 or 3 weeks and then release it in about 6-7 months. I've not even started writing it yet. I plan to in the next couple of weeks, maybe at the start of November. But I like to do that because there's lots of reasons why. Firstly, there's some deadline, isn't there? If you've done that, there's some deadline that it will come out, whether you like it or not. Even if I haven't got the cover yet, and it just says cover coming soon, on the Amazon page. And it also gives people, if they finish the book and they're in, as I say, in that heady, warm feeling that you get at the end of a book, it gives them somewhere to go and pledge their £3 or £4 or $4 or whatever, and pledge their money to buy your next book. That's essentially what they're doing there, isn't it? They're sort of staking their money. The company, Amazon or whoever, doesn't take the money until you actually deliver the product, but they've pledged it at that stage. So for me, I quite like doing it that way, and I think that's good, both in a inspiration right away. I've got to get this done. I've got to do this, and from a sort of financial perspective, because there's a call to action at the end of that book for them to go on and do that.
Yeah, that's great. A friend of mine she wrote a traditionally published book, and I think her pre-orders were out for a couple months at least, because I pre-ordered and I got an advanced copy and read it, but then I forgot. And then I got the email like, oh, the pre-orders here, which is great. Because one thing, for those of you who don't know, no matter how long your pre-order is, all the sales are processed on the day you launch, which means that all of those count towards you, sort of your numbers on that first day. So sort of the more numbers you can have on that first day, the sooner you can get on that bestseller list, which helps the algorithm and all that. So definitely leaning towards the longer lead time seems to be what traditional and indie publishers prefer for the most part. Jill's got a question. It's about traditional publishing, but how will the publisher help market you?
That depends on your publisher. That depends on the arrangement you have with them. I wouldn't like to answer that really, because I don't know. I think you'd have to ask them. Would you know any more to answer that, Chris? Would you have any insights?
Yeah. This sort of sounds. Luke and I were talking earlier before the call, because Nomadic Matt, he has a traditional publisher for his books, and I get to meet authors, all kinds of travel authors, at our conference, and most of them, unless you're a huge multi-million-dollar big name author, they don't help you at all. They don't give you a marketing budget. They don't help you. You'll maybe get a little bit of help, like arranging a book tour or something like that, but even that is minimum. I helped plan half of Matt's most recent book tour because the publisher was too slow. And Matt's he's like a big name guy. Like Nomadic Matt's someone people have heard of, but he's not like a selling 10 million copies kind of, J.K. Rowling or whoever. So unless you're a huge name, the publishers don't really help you, which means even if you're a traditional publisher or an indie publisher, you're going to be doing that work yourself. The indie publishers just make more money, make a bigger cut of the money doing it. So, yeah, unfortunately. Got a question here about like the craft of writing. How can people create better characters or plots? Do you have any sort of resource suggestions, of their courses or groups or anything for sort of new writers looking to hone their skills?
I mean, there are several courses. There's lots of courses and groups that you'll find all over the internet, starting at ones that just cost $5-10, whatever, going up to those that cost thousands and thousands, and those things are great. It is good to upskill in that way. In terms of just a sort of piece of advice, it's a hard one, isn't it, to think. One thing I would say actually is to be sort of aware of every character needs to have sort of an agenda, something that they want, something that they are there for. They serve a purpose. And I think in my earlier versions of Kathmandu, there were a lot of unnecessary characters who were just there to sort of fill out things. I'd spend a few pages talking with someone in a hotel reception, or the character would, and they'd have a nice little chat. And then when I went back and saw that during the many hundreds of edits that book went through, I was like, this is unnecessary. It doesn't drive things forwards. There's no tension here. You only need to show that character, show that conversation if he or she's intention either sort of helps your protagonist or hinders them in some way. So you're not showing things that aren't driving that sort of pace, that sort of plot forwards. I mean, there are books where actually that's proven wrong, and there are lots of classics where these sorts of things do happen. But for me, in my genre, where I want the books to be very page turning, I want them to be quite concise, I want them to be very sort of pin sharp in the way that they're delivered. That's something I always try to do.
I'm just going to put a link in the chat with a bunch of books on writing. If you scroll to the bottom of this for any new writers, there's a bunch in there that both Matt and myself have recommended. They're not all about the same, some of them are, one of them is about screenwriting or writing for film, but the basics all apply. A good character in a movie, good character in the book is the same principles. So folks can check that out. We had a few people, Luke, ask about so when it comes to you finish your book and now, okay, you need, you've polished it to the best of your ability, but maybe you want to pay an editor or a proofreader. You need a formatter, someone to design the cover. Where do you find those people? How do you build your team? What, ballpark, how much should people be expected to required to spend? If I finish my book, it's going to cost me couple $100, couple $1,000. What can people sort of expect once they've finished their book?
Yeah, it certainly can cost thousands, but there are ways to do that in a more effective way as well. And I think one of those is being part of a sort of author group or an author community, like you've mentioned. There are many on Facebook. There are many through the courses that you may have put on there, and these sorts of things. And they will recommend the cover designers and your cover designers and your editors and these sorts of things. One thing I would say actually that I sort of wish I'd done is I would have liked to work with someone earlier in my writing process to weed out the mistakes that I made throughout the whole book, if that makes sense. Like my first editor had such a job because I'd made these mistakes time and time again without realizing they were wrong over the course of 80,000 words. Whereas had I have worked with some kind of writing coach or worked with some kind of editor earlier in the process and sent them 500 words, or even if you've got the finished book, send those 500 words to an editor. They'll probably do it for free, to be honest. Send that, just to do a sample. Send those 500 words to an editor. Let them go through it. And if they pick out something that you're like, oh, right, that's wrong. Okay. Use that search function on Word or whatever word processor you use, or read it through manually and see if you've done those things again. See if you've done those points repeatedly, because I know that if I've made a mistake, unless it's some little typing mistake, if I've made a mistake, it probably is in there more than once. Like it's probably in the book more than once in something of that length. Secondly, I'd talk about a program called Pro Writing Aid, which I use, and I think it's really good, actually. It's got all sorts, it's essentially like spell check, but just a lot more advanced. And you can program it to how your sort of style. So there's various options. Academic writing is one, technical writing, writing fiction. And it will go through the manuscript and it will pick up repetitions of words. It will pick up passive voice. It will pick up always starting the sentence with I, or it will pick up if you always use short sentences or long sentences or whatever, or if you've used the wrong sort or too many exclamation marks or the wrong sort of speech marks or whatever. It picks up all these little intricate things that words spell check isn't sophisticated enough to do. And that's something like, I think you get a 14-day trial for free on it, actually. And I think it's something like $90 for the year, for a year subscription. So that's, I mean, when you're thinking of paying an editor, probably $300 to $400 for a reasonably signed book, it may be even more. That's a good amount to pay, I think, to have something cut a lot of those things out for you.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Matt, when he's looking for, so Matt has an editor, but when we need minor help, one website we go to, and I'll put it in the chat, is upwork.com. It's a great site for hiring freelancers. I self-published a book years ago, and that's where I found, like my formatter and, someone to do some editing and proofreading and random stuff like that. And it's a great way because you can find it can make it affordable, so for anyone at that stage, that's a good resource.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, Fiverr as well is another similar one, isn't it?
Yeah. We had one question about deadlines. How do you stick to? Are you writing every day? How do you keep yourself on task when Because if there's a publisher breathing down your neck, you've touched on this by uploading your book, but if you're traveling, if I'm lounging out in Thailand, I'm not going to want to sit and write in my office, So how do you keep yourself on track, when it's not a pandemic, at least? Because if we're stuck at home, okay, we don't have.
Oh yeah,
excuses,
it's been great for us writers, hasn't it?
Yeah,
the pandemic, honestly. Yeah. I think there's several ways to do that. I think, all of my other work is freelance, so I'm quite good in that. I'm very lucky in that can work around the schedule that I want that to. But I did write my first book whilst I was a full-time teacher. So I've sort of seen it on both sides of the fence. And I tell you what, when you've got a full-time job, or I know talking to writers who are parents as well, their children sort of act in the same way. When you've got these constraints on your time, you make use of every minute that you have, quiet and focused time. You really do make use of that. So when I had a full-time job, I'd get up an hour earlier, I think just before 5 o'clock, and I would sit at my computer for about an hour, and I'd do 800 to 1,000 words 3 or 4 mornings a week. And that was my sort of pledge to get that done, to do that. Now, I work slightly differently. I do 3 creative days a week. I find after 3 days, that's enough. And I do about 10,000 words if I'm writing a first draft over the course of those 3 days. And that will take me probably 4 or 5 hours. And what I tend to do is I'll use, and it does depend. I also find variety is very useful, actually. I find sticking with a routine, it can get boring after a while, and variety is good. But what I tend to do is I'll do my first writing stint is an hour. My next one is 50 minutes. Then it's 45 minutes. Then it's 40 minutes, and they get shorter as the day goes on, as my attention sort of drains, until I'm doing about half an hour by the end, and then I'll have a break and go and make coffee and whatever, walk to the shop or whatever I need to do. So I'm splitting it up over the course of time. But I know that's a luxury that a lot of people on this call, and a lot of people generally don't have a full day to be able to do that. But as I say, that can be a benefit too, because you do make use of your time in a more aggressive way if you have less of it.
Yeah. I did the for those of you who know Masterclass, the website that has sort of all different kinds of classes.
Yeah, really good.
I've done all the writing ones, and one of the writers, he was like a full-time lawyer, working, I don't know, 80 plus hours a week, and he would step to like 2 a.m, like writing every night. I was like, I couldn't do that. Like it's a grind, man. Like being creative is exhausting.
Yeah,
like it's very tiring. So that's a struggle, always finding the time. When you're writing, are you listening to music, anything like that? How do you get in the zone, stay in the zone?
Yes, I do sometimes listen to some sort of like meditation noise in the background. Sometimes I prefer it just to be quiet, actually. And again, it's variety. And I've also got a playlist of more upbeat, sort of techie, housey music, which I quite like. So again, it depends on my mood. I like changing things around. It depends on the part of the book that I'm at, how my energy is myself. There's a lot of things, but for me, variety is very good. And I think actually it's one of those reasons that writing and travel do work. Sitting on the train, for 2 hours or 3 hours or whatever, you're sat there in a seat. Why not? You've got your laptop. I've written some great things on trains and buses and aeroplanes and in airports and all sorts of places like that.
Totally. And it's inspiration, right? Like you're seeing new landscapes, you're meeting new people. Like, you need a character to look a certain way, and there's all these new interesting folks you can pull things for. So yeah, I definitely agree. But one person suggested Readsy. That's another resource I forgot.
Readsy is good. I have used that before. It is towards the expensive end though, Readsy.
It is. Yeah. I hired someone to edit my query letter from Readsy because I'm hoping to publish a traditional book, and I think it was like $100 for a single page edit of that's like 400 words. So there's a lot of money in being a query editor. If anyone out there is looking for a side hustle, probably way easier than being an author.
Definitely, yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, I'm in the wrong business. Do we have any other questions before we wrap up today? As Lou said, if you have more questions later, you can always shoot them an email. He'll be happy to help. But if not, we can wrap up there.
Fantastic.
Great. Luke, this was super awesome. I was super excited to host this. We got one last question here about branding. You've got a great, that's one thing I will say, your covers are sleek, and when I'm scrolling through on the Kindle, it's it looks perfect. Everything's super professional. You've got a very nice setup for everything. What's your branding secret? Any tips out there to share?
Thank you. Again, I think it's hiring a professional to do it. I've never done one of my own covers. They've all been done by a professional who I've used now. For the first 2 books, I used different people. And then the 3rd book, I got the designer I'm with now, and we've just sort of got on. And because he knows what I like, I sent my brief to him last week for Istanbul. Excuse me, for Istanbul. And it was essentially 20 words. It was, "Hi, Dave, need a new book. Istanbul. I'm thinking light blue," and off he goes. And in 3 weeks, he'll send me it back, and I've got a vision what that's going to look like. I'm thinking the blue mosque with the minarets there, and Istanbul, the title, obviously. And I think once you've got the thing, the mold, it's quite easy just to chunk out new ones. And also with the writing process, when you're writing in a series, it is a lot more straightforward to just think, right, what's the next chapter of these characters' life? Where do we go from here? Rather than sort of inventing that from the ground up.
Yeah, great point. So thanks, Luke, for coming out. Really appreciate you sharing your wisdom, experience. Folks, if you have more questions, you can reach out to Luke. His email is right there. I'm just going to share my screen for a quick second.